Because you and I, we have our favorite texture painters, but probably to the studios that they work for, they're just texture painters. They're just people that can can do the job well.
Welcome to The Naked Texture Artist. On this podcast, I have deep and honest conversations with visual effects and animation veterans about their challenges and growth as working artists. My name is Mark-Pierre Sondergaard, and I'll be your host. Let's get started. This is the most profound episode yet for me. I think I've been very open about this. I make this podcast for my own sake. Yeah, 100% selfish. I have a lot of learning and growing and figuring things out to do. And I figure if I need it, chances are that others could benefit from this as well. Might as well share. This episode contains some of the biggest aha moments, helping shape and educate my thinking. These 30 minutes has so many key insights that I've used to calibrate my thinking about my career, my role in a studio, and how to navigate my future. I've privately kept going back to this recording over and over when my thinking sort of loses its footing over time, so you can understand how excited I am to release this to the public. If it's not clear from the description, this is, of course, the fourth slice from my lengthy conversation with Mr. Thanos, Chris Nichols, creature guy and texture artist extraordinaire. As always, Chris is incredibly gracious and generous with his hard-earned wisdom. This episode really is an education. Please listen, take notes, apply the learnings, come back and recalibrate. Or maybe, if it makes little sense to you, no worries. Come back later when you get to this point in your life and career. As I'm putting together this episode, it's happening in the shadow of a couple of events. I'm still unemployed because of the strikes in Hollywood. And recently I finished with a mentee as part of an education program. But I think when you're mentoring someone, it's not just for a semester. So she's also someone who has a very big percentage of my mind these days, as we're sending her out into the world to find her first job. So I'm listening to Chris' words of wisdom against the backdrop of these two situations, so to speak. When I was in middle school, I had a job shelving books at the local library. Books were my first love, and they'll probably be my last. There I came across a massively popular relationship book called Women Who Love Too Much. As this teenage boy who had never had a relationship with a person of the opposite sex outside of my immediate family, but certainly was in an age where I thought a lot about all of that stuff, the title puzzled me endlessly. I thought love was the answer to everything. Then how is it possible to love too much? When I listen to my conversation with people like Chris Nichols or Miriam Catherine, it's clear that we share a great love for this work that we do, texturing. But it could be, and I should underline that here I'm strictly speaking for myself, but it could be that loving it too much becomes a hindrance. Although it would mean that you're willing to go to insane lengths for your craft, it could also mean that you become too irrational in the workplace. It might mean that this thing, which should be just a work thing, is allowed more space and time in your life than what is healthy. There are many aspects to this. As I'm looking at my work life from that distance, which not working allows me, and with the time and space to think about it, because I'm not just rushing to meet the next deadline or dailies or whatever, I'm trying to spring clean my thinking on all of this, recalibrate it all to work better. This is what I love about Chris Nichols, because he's obviously been around the block and earned his stripes the hard way. He has tasted both dirt and success. But even though he, if anybody, has earned the right to say, hey, I know what I'm talking about, he still doesn't hit you over the head with his insights. He graciously allows you into the conversation and considers your input too. And the end result is just something so thought-provoking. Just what you need when you're trying to understand your place in the world as an artist. Through this conversation, I will insert my own findings and observations much more frequently than a regular episode. Because there's just so much in these 30 minutes. Anyway, enough talking. Let's get after it. So what do you have against babies?
What? What do you mean?
This is from the old CG Garage podcast.
Oh, okay.
So babies, are they still the hardest things to make?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah?
Definitely. I mean, did you see the latest Flash movie?
No, I did not. No. I think I
some
have.
babies in there
Is that right? Okay.
Yep, it still stands. Hardest thing to do is a baby. I've never seen a realistic CG baby yet.
By extension, would then and a really old wrinkled person be the easiest thing to do? You got all the detail in the world, right? There.
I feel like humans are definitely very hard to do. Like and what everybody agrees is great doesn't necessarily stand the test of time. Like even Benjamin Button, right? Like that was like an Academy Award winning film.
Sure.
But if you watch it now and measure it against, say, like, I don't know, something in Dial of Destiny, like the new Indiana Jones movie, where it's like a full Harrison Ford CG character. I mean, it's just like the technology's moved on. It's just one of those things. But the uncanny valley, right? I don't like to talk about it too much because it's not something that interests me that much. I'm still more the fantasy creature guy rather than trying to replicate reality. But every now and then I see stuff that I'm like, pretty good, pretty great. It's pretty impressive. But if I feel that way in 10 years, I can't say.
No. So you've had the pleasure or challenge of leading a texture team to some acclaim, I might add. And you were saying you're basically doing meetings and management stuff till almost the day's over, and then a few hurried moments of actual texturing yourself. Do you find, as a lead, how do you balance those things? That, what should we say, the discipline that you originally loved and was good at, sort of the artist work, I'd imagine that's sort of what feeds you, what gives you energy for your day. And then this other stuff, does that suck energy out of you? Sort of like that you have sort of a give and take sort of, or do you find energy, like positive sort of energy, fulfillment, whatever we want to call it, satisfaction from the management side of things as well?
It's been a few years now since I've been a lead. I think the last time I was a lead was probably back in 2019. So it's been several years. But I mean, I enjoyed it, but I think it was because I had a really great team. Like I just would really enjoy working with artists and seeing them progress, and I would kind of get a secondhand high just of seeing their work and being able to point out something that might improve the quality of the work. So just being in dailies and seeing the progress on something was really thrilling. I really enjoyed that. And I felt like having my day split up between, say, dailies and then individual artist review and then maybe a bidding meeting, and then I would get to do my own work. It was like you pack so much into a day, but because it was in like modules and little blocks, I felt like I was getting energized from each one of those modules. So I don't ever remember being like, oh, I hate this or I just can't stand it. But if I had a day when I was just in meetings from start to finish, say like I had a Monday or a Friday where you had like a catch-up meeting in the morning and then you had to do a kickoff meeting and then there was like ingest or something like that, I feel like that would be absolutely exhausting because it was like the same thing for hours. And half the time you just be like looking at your phone or doing doodles or something in your notebook. because nothing was that relevant to whatever your department was doing.
I had a brief spell where our CG soup was he had to go away and he was on set and what have you, and I kind of was the what should we say the senior most guy in the studio in a small medium studio, so I had to take over CG soup there for 2 weeks. Absolutely hated it. Absolutely hated it. I was basically running. I was everybody else's slave for those 2 weeks. It's basically they give you a fancy title, but
Mm.
really you're just trying to solve everybody else's problems
Yeah.
except your own. You know, it was it's not for me. I gotta say.
Yeah, and some people really thrive in that environment, and you can tell that they're the right person for the job because that's what they do best. They're problem solvers, technical problem solvers, and they don't mind that stress. And I assure you too, like if you kept doing that job for another month or something, you probably would find your legs and start to enjoy aspects of it. But
That's a good point. That's
yeah,
yeah.
you do adapt to anything. Like I think the first time I was a lead, it was on All I See Is You, and I was the model texture lead on it. It was a very small show though. Most of the time I was doing everything, but I'm glad I had that small show to kind of find my mode, my style. Um, and then the next show was Power Rangers. Then I had a slightly bigger team, and then finally, I got to work on Infinity War and the other bigger ones. But I'd sort of had a bit of lead up time. I got a bit of confidence. But if you'd thrown me on Infinity War, I may have crashed like really hardcore because I don't think I would have had the confidence or the experience to sort of keep swimming, especially when I was would be expected to produce art as well as manage teams and attend all the meetings and be the spokesperson for the department. I feel like that would be very hard, but luckily I just had everything sort of progressively lead up to that.
So what I hear from you is these sort of days with blocks of various different activities, they keep things interesting because it's so, you know, like you have so many different inputs across a day, as opposed to just a day jam packed with meetings. But and you take what should we say a fatherly pride in like your team, like look what they've made, you know, kind of you're proud
Mm.
on behalf of your team and derive that kind of joy from it. Is that correct?
Yeah, yeah, for the most part, I would say so. I mean, everybody has their stressful periods in their life as well. I mean, that's the thing is when you're on these big shows, they last so long and the intensity can be pretty high. And, it's just normal. Something's going to break at some point, whether the pipeline's down, it's a really frustrating week, somebody's updated the software without telling anybody, and so your archives aren't working anymore. Like there's always stuff that is frustrating, but I think the memories that I keep are the good memories,
Mm.
and the positive stuff. That's what I remember most about the experience, which is good. I can't say that about every experience. Other studios I've worked at, I only remember the negative things. I don't remember the positive things. So in retrospect, it's really how they affected you at your core, and that's why I think I remember those films, those projects as being so positive.
I think psychologists figured out that there's a ratio. So let's say if you get the one to one, one positive impulse to one negative impulse, you know, there's a ratio where at some point it tips over and you say, okay, now this is just all negative or all positive. You know, so I think that probably helps shape our memories of how things were.
Yeah,
Speaking of
yeah.
memories, did you have would you say you had an easy time breaking into the industry or a hard time or just sort of normalish or how
Um,
did you
I
experience it?
I came from Perth in West Australia, which is
This
on the map. It's the most isolated city in the world. Our closest neighbor is Bali,
yeah.
uh,
So this is
and
like a backwater basically, as in there are no visual
yeah,
effects jobs here.
there are very few. I mean, I did sort of cut my teeth there. I did some freelance work for small studios. They weren't really VFX studios, they were more post facilities. So they would do everything, the editing, they would do the sound, and also some very rudimentary VFX. I knew I had to get out of Perth, I just didn't know where I wanted to go. It was either going to be Sydney, which is it's more of a VFX hub now than it was, but it still had about 4 or 5 studios that were viable. Animal Logic being one of them. Um, or I was going to come to Canada. I was fortunate that I had a
Wait.
Canadian.
What? Sorry, me from the northern hemisphere of the world here. I am,
Yeah.
like it's typical trope. You're from Australia. Australia is not New Zealand. However, a lot of people figure since you're kind of neighbors across the water,
Mm.
like as you're in Australia, you weren't thinking, and we're having the big impulse of what should we say, like the big influence of Lord of the Rings happening and all this. You weren't setting like, I'm going over there. I'm heading to New Zealand.
Oh, that was always the goal. That
Okay.
was where I wanted to end up. But you can't just decide to go to Weta and end up at Weta. You have to already have a bunch of credits under your belt,
Right, right.
or at least know somebody that can get you in. I didn't know anybody. I didn't even know anybody in Wellington at that time, and so that's why I was like, well, I'm gonna have to start my career at a hub.
Surely I'm not the only one with the "one does not simply walk into mortar" meme flashing across my inner eye now.
One does not simply walk into Mordor.
Come on, Weta, who made Lord of the Rings?
You can't just decide to go to Weta.
No? Anyway, I don't think you can just decide to work for any studio out there. If that was possible, I would have had my start at Pixar. Sure, you can have goals, and that certainly increases the likelihood of things happening. But even so, Weta has a special place among studios. I don't think it's a controversial opinion that Weta, by and large, consistently does the most outstanding work among all the visual effects studios today. Sure, a lot of other studios occasionally have their moments in the sun, but with Weta, it's just such a consistent and high-level output. Naturally, most artists gravitate towards being a part of that, particularly if you are obsessed with creatures like Chris is. I have observed luck, or just simply the random element, plays a massive role in a lot of careers. No, good artists aren't just lucky. But a lot of good artists are not particularly well known simply because they were just not in the right place at the right time. I have personally applied to Weta a good handful of times. I think one time they replied back. That's not encouraging. Feels a little bit like, don't call us, we'll call you. But I also know that if what I'm offering and when I'm offering it doesn't match with what they need at that very moment, then that stuff just doesn't go any further. There's zero value judgment in that. Doesn't mean that they wouldn't need me at another point. Of course, I might not be available then. That's how it goes sometimes. In fact, I have a number of studios I would like to work for various reasons, and there have been some flirting going on with them over time. But whenever I call them, they're not hiring, and when they call me, I've just committed myself to another place. Like I said, that simple random element of luck, if you will, it plays a huge factor. Because I make it my business to know as much as I can about as many things as possible, I've been in the odd situation where I knew 2 candidates interviewing with Weta in the final round of the hiring process for the same role. I was very surprised that they picked one guy and not the other. If it is possible to qualify that, to my surprise, they picked the lesser candidate of the 2, as far as I'm concerned. I make no mistake, they got a good guy, but they missed out on a legend in the making. But hey, despite the well-deserved legend of Weta, they're only just human beings after all. Or maybe I just don't know what I'm talking about. That is always a possibility you should keep open. But even if you find yourself in the southern hemisphere, far away from all the studios in either Europe or North America, it's clear that one doesn't simply walk into Weta.
Somewhere that has a lot of studios, and the most logical place for me was Vancouver. I was born in Saskatchewan in
Oh,
Canada,
really?
even
Okay.
though I was raised in Australia. So I had a Canadian passport, and so that seemed like the most obvious choice. And that's how I ended up in Vancouver to really begin my career.
Okay. If you're just sort of like with a brilliant, easy hindsight thing, anything you could have done differently that would have made an outsized impact? If you're going back to that starting point again with all you know now, what would
Yeah.
you have done
Oh, if
differently?
only, hey.
Yeah. Oh, hello. We can daydream.
That would be lovely. I mean, I really undervalued my skill set. I think I didn't know my worth, and as a result, I was usually probably the lowest paid person in the studio. When I came to digital domain, I remember like people would be when they found out how much I was making, they were like, "You should ask for a raise." But I just didn't know. Like I was like, "Well, I mean, it seems reasonable to me. I mean,
Right.
based on my skills or whatever."
Yeah,
But
this is one of these things about money. Since nobody talks about it, it's all.
no,
Sometimes you have those moments when you're realizing he's making what, and
yeah,
or a recruiter calls you up with a contract, and you're like, "Excuse me, you want to double my salary?" That
mm,
it's just this moments that the curtain is lifted. But how can you
yeah.
know?
Well, even if you find out what other people are making, like I always suffered from pretty severe imposter syndrome.
Imposter syndrome, Mr. Thanos. Well, you already heard Miss Smock.
I'm really always worried that they found out that I'm maybe not uh, as smart as they think I am. You know?
Imposter syndrome, we all have it. So please don't suffer in shame, thinking it's only you who are not good enough, only you who are just on the verge of being found out as a fraud. As this is an incredibly deep seated and ingrained thing in us, psychologically, I've said this before, and I will no doubt say this again many more times. Please don't suffer in silence. The way out is to reach out to other artists and open up. Then you will no doubt receive support and validation that will not remove your imposter syndrome, but it helps cut some of the pain and shame from it. The more frequently and openly I communicate with my fellow artists about my work and experience, the less I feel the impact of imposter syndrome. Will it ever disappear? I doubt it. I doubt it very much. When I read the writings of artists like Vincent van Gogh and Hokusai, it seems like a constant factor through life, no matter what successes you have achieved along the way. So don't wait for it to pass. It will not. Take action and don't suffer in silence.
Um, like I think maybe that came from coming from Perth as well. Like just you're from nowhere, and I don't know, you don't have any leads or anything like that, and it's just like, well, what am I worth? Like I don't really have any big credits under my belt. That initial step is really just trying to get any form of experience, just to kind of get to the bigger studios. Um, so yeah, I mean, as far even if you hear what people are making, you may not even feel like you're worthy of that. But I've definitely been in positions where I feel like I'm asking an exceeding amount of money, and then the recruiter comes back and says, "Oh, I think we can do a little bit better than that."
Oh,
Just like tack on a bit more, and I'm like, "Oh, I really must be undervaluing my worth." But the situation is, it's like, where are you at in the ebb and flow of the industry? Because sometimes, recruiters are going to pay a premium to get you in because there's so much work and there's so little talent. But 6 months later, it could be the reverse. Like right now, we're going through a period of time, like I was talking about earlier, where there just isn't really that much work, and so recruiters are like probably lowballing because they can, because everybody's lowballing. There's just not that much work. So it just depends where you are on that sin wave.
Yeah, absolutely. But once you factor all these psychological things into it, like you mentioned, imposter syndrome, and I come from a small, tiny countryside town in Denmark where there's absolutely
Hmm.
nothing happening. So I don't know, Perth is a city. I mean, come on, don't sell yourself short. You know, I it's a city people know internationally.
Sure, but I wasn't in Perth. I was like south of Perth in a
Oh,
in a dairy farming community.
okay. So you're from you and I. We come from the same little place, and that's sort of
Yeah.
bred into you, or beaten into you, or something into you.
Hmm.
That no matter if you're now Mr. Big Shot doing great, and you're living in a sparkling metropolis and whatever, you're still somehow that little boy inside. You know.
Yeah, I think so too. There's a bit of that inferiority complex, I guess. But
How
yeah,
do
I
you
think that
do you
it definitely got in the way when I was starting out, I think, because I probably was a lot better than I thought I was, and I was capable of more. But I definitely got the impression that there were some people that were taking advantage of that.
yeah.
Um, And so, I mean, if I was to go back now and redo things, I definitely would probably set my standards a little bit higher, because a lot of what you present to the world is what people take.
Yeah.
So if you present yourself as a very confident person and don't take as much crap, people don't tend to treat you as badly.
Definitely, definitely. Whatever you put out in the world, that's kind of what you're gonna get back, I think.
As long as you can deliver.
Yeah,
If you sell yourself short, that's bad. But if you over deliver, if you over promise and under deliver, that's also very bad.
true. That is true. What do you? It sounds like you've had your fair share of bad gigs.
Oh, I would say that probably the first 7 years of my career were pretty bad.
We tend to idolize and idealize other people. I think all texture artists here only think highly of Chris. Probably all visual effects artists, actually. And so there is a great chance that the pinnacle that Chris has reached, maybe in our minds, that is where he's always been. Sprung fully formed from the womb as a texture hero he is today. Or at least striding from success to success at an ever quickening pace. I do know a number of people who have been really fortunate at key turns, which has propelled them much further forward than their peers. You can have middling levels of artistic ability, understanding of the software, work ethic, but if you have one or two really lucky breaks early in your career, where you are the most fragile, then that gets the snowball rolling at a critical time. And then as that gathers pace, it starts looking like you are an unstoppable force all along. But I'm very happy to hear that Mr. Thanos also came through the hard way. Not that Chris' misfortune will do anything positive for you. You doing good is not bad for me, nor is my misfortune your gain, but it shows that it can be done. And when Chris says that the first 7 years of his career were pretty bad, and then when I look at certain years of my career with great regret, where I had to turn down amazing shows for immigration and family reasons and instead work in crap studios and nobody shows, suffering studio bankruptcies and whatnot. Well, hearing Chris say that makes me feel a lot better about the realities I couldn't avoid in my own career. Still, he got there in the end. The strength of human determination is incredible. The world will eventually yield to an artist who knows where he or she is going and will not relent. That is very motivating and life-affirming. No, maybe not easy at times, but never impossible. As Rudyard Kipling said, if you don't get what you want, either you didn't really want it, or you were trying to bargain over the price. Maybe you get lucky breaks, maybe you don't. But cream will rise to the top eventually. It's down to you.
I mean, I almost ran out of money at one point. When I came to Vancouver, it wasn't the hub that it is now. There was really just a couple of big studios in town. That would have been Image Engine and Rainmaker, which is now Framestore. And everywhere else was more like TV work. They were just getting bits of Stargate or Battlestar Galactica, like smaller sort of but prestigious shows. And that's what the landscape was. It was like a lot of small boutiques. And so it was very hard without having a lot of experience kind of getting work at those places. So I was lucky enough to have a friend that had come to Vancouver the year prior and was able to sort of recommend me for some gigs. And he came from Perth as well. So that really helped. That probably elevated me to a position where I was going to get some work. But after 2009, things just blew up in Vancouver. There was like studios opening every 6 months. Started with MPC, Digital Domain, ILM. Everybody ended up here at some point. And for the most part, they're still open. So that, I'm in a studio city now, like where there's probably 20 large studios and lots of smaller boutiques.
Yeah.
And now also the landscape's changed again, where I'm working a lot more for international companies than I am for the local studios.
Have you learned any rules of thumb or do's or don'ts about when you're picking gigs, as in how to how to avoid the absolute worst nightmares and just a little increase your batting average a little bit?
It's always a hard one. You never really know. You can sort of develop a sixth sense, I would say. Your best bet is to try to talk to somebody that works at the studio that you potentially could be going to, if you have the time. Like sometimes you'll get a recruiter that's just like, we need somebody straight away, and the money looks pretty good.
That's not a good sign. That sounds like a 9/11 studio. That sounds like a 9/11 show, an emergency show to me. When they need somebody in right now and they're willing to
yeah,
pay you anything,
yeah.
that means you're gonna be dropped straight into hell, and they will drop you as soon as the show is over,
Oh, you're absolutely
or the
right.
fires have been put out. Once they get it
Yeah.
manageable, then sorry, yeah, we just shortness of work, and we have a budget, and sorry, but anyway, here's 2 weeks severance.
Absolutely, but I can assure you that every studio will do that. There isn't anybody that's not guilty of that
True,
in
true.
VFX. It doesn't matter if you're ILM or DD or Weta or whoever.
Every studio will do that. There is not a studio that will not do that. Chris' simple statement there was a huge aha moment for me. Maybe you know already. Maybe you've already passed this mental milestone. Or maybe you're wondering what this is all about. Let me explain. Life moves in stages, particularly in terms of how you understand the world. You have one way of seeing the world, and as long as it works reasonably well, in terms of helping you understand the world, you continue with that worldview until you get hit by an inspirational lightning bolt, or it simply stops working. Then you try to find another deeper level of understanding that can help explain what is going on around you. I think this is true for all, but particularly for artists and for our careers. Or so I'd like to think. And each stage sort of has its own theme and goals and feeling, which over time can prove to be nothing but a mirage. But you can't see that. You can't see that far because the challenges you're facing right now are blocking your view of what lies further down the road. When you're trying to break into the industry, you think, when I just get my foot in the door, then everything will be fine. Then you get your foot in the door. In my case, as a runner at the ill-fated Digital Domain London studio. After eating much dirt, I was allowed to start doing occasional simple texture tasks. Eventually that work grew to a constant part of my day, along with my running duties. And we could have ridden into the sunset here with all the happy forever afters if it wasn't that this studio went bust. Note to self, don't ever believe Americans who tell you, we love you, let's do lunch. And don't ever count on Indians financing your work with endless credit. So after getting my foot in the door, the next big phase for me was, when my first show is finally out, then everything will be fine. Because then I'll have a reel with real show assets. When that show finally did come out, most of my work was in a nighttime shot on an alien planet. My beautiful textures obscured by darkness. So that thought that had kept me going, well, there was no happy ever after there. Over the years, as more and more pieces were added to my reel, it got gradually easier and easier to get people to respond to my job search. When I met Manuel Huertas at Atomic Fiction, I had another aha moment. Seeing the owners fawning over Manuel at a time when other artists were laid off was a real eye-opener. I'd never seen an artist have that amount of clout before. If anything, that lit an even stronger fire under my desire to improve as an artist, both technically and artistically. Seeing Manuel was a huge aha moment, thinking, if only my skills are good enough, my life will be easy. I wanted to be that untouchable artist in the studio. Surely, then I would be happy. Years later, I certainly felt a bit of that in moments. I'm thinking of specific shows in specific studios where a string of other artists had broken their neck on a project or a hero asset, and I was brought in as you kind of felt the studio was hanging in the balance. Solving those kind of tasks, oh yes, now you had the ear of the owners and all of that, but still no happy ever after. Before speaking to Miriam Catherine, I used to believe that it was just a matter of acquiring better and better skills. Then the clouds would eventually depart to show rainbows and sunshine. But a big aha moment from my conversation with her was that even when you get to that level where there really is no asset you can't do, that level still has a whole slew of other problems. Ever been out in town at night, visiting bar after bar, club after club, all boring and not exciting? You are certain that surely people must be having a blast somewhere else. What is the most exciting place then? The one you are not currently inside. I started drawing up a list of famous studios I wanted to work for. Selective hearing as I scoured the grapevine made me believe that this is where it will finally all be good. And then you get there. Studio after studio, turns out they are more or less as good or as bad as the ones you've already worked in, no matter how famous they are or how big shows they do. Disillusioned, you wonder where to next. Where can artists find happiness and satisfaction? Where can you find a place to call home? I couldn't make sense of it till Chris, in his inimitable fashion, points out, no studio will not do that. I've had studios who have bent over backwards to bring me on board, paid for my move to their city and province, sign-on bonus on top, and paid without question whatever rate I asked. So when you have that up front, you think, wow, they're really serious. They want a long-term relationship with me. That the contract is only 6 months, well, you brush that aside. You tell yourself that this studio has people who's been there for 20 years or more. So in your mind, this is the beginning of exactly such a beautiful, fruitful, long-term relationship. Naturally, you're very confused when 6 months later, your contract runs out. That's that. No extension. A polite goodbye. And that is that. That must be the equivalent of the girl taken out on a really expensive date, only to be ghosted afterwards. In your mind, you blame yourself. Clearly, your work must not have been up to standard, or you must have said the wrong thing to the wrong person at the wrong time. Despite the promising start, you clearly screwed up. You don't know where or how, but that is the only explanation available to you. It's not a good feeling. Imagine then the confusion when the same studio reaches out to you again a year later. Again, no expenses spared, paying a sign-on bonus and any rate you would want. Imagine the beginning plays out similarly and the end plays out exactly the same way. Do you know what this is? I had no idea. Now I do. This is a 911 show. An emergency show. A show that is so horribly late or behind schedule, and production will do anything to right the ship. Once the show is out of trouble, the fires have been put out, and is back on schedule, you will be ditched again. You may be the girl who wants a family and the house with a white picket fence and happy ever after, but this guy, charming as he is, only wants something here and now. He is willing to spend quite a bit to satisfy those urges, but that is as far as it goes. At this point, I think we should also point out that there is a whole other class of artists. There are not that many of them, because beyond the skills we all have to put forth, it does require really, really good stroke of luck. We're talking about artists who married their high school sweetheart, so to speak. Artists who, through incredibly good fortune, landed in a stable studio on the first try, got renewed over and over until they finally were offered a staff position. Happy ever after, forever home in the first try. All of this probably sounds like psychobabble to them because they've only ever known the idea of working in a single studio. And all of what I've said so far from this parallel world is just crazy. If that is you, good for you. I would add to that, you have no idea how fortunate you were. Count yourself lucky that you do not have to make sense of and navigate this world I describe like the rest of us. Anyway, back to the experience of being hired as a firefighter on a 911 show. When that has happened to you a few times, you learn to spot it. You should reliably be able to spot it in the interview or hiring phase. See, in the beginning, you reason only this and that studio will do this. Certainly, as Chris points out, some studios are infamous for unsavory practices around their staff. If you don't know, then I suggest you follow Salty Animators on Instagram, which acts as a brutally honest running commentary on the events of our industry. For most of us, these studios are fortunately well known, so then you assume that the other studios want true love and long-lasting relationships. So when you've been used for 911 work, I guess you add that studio to the naughty list and you double down on finding the truly good studios from the remaining pile. But this is where Chris' insight made me go, aha, because I was getting more and more disillusioned as studio after studio was added to my naughty list. The truth is, they are all like that. This is just lions being lions after all. After you worked in 4 or 5 studios, that whole speech they give you in the beginning, here we're different, we care about our artists, we're one big family. After hearing that a few times, you just mentally roll your eyes and go, yeah, sure, on the inside, while of course smiling politely on the outside. But should you now be in a studio whose work you've always admired, or where a favorite artist of yours work, or maybe you have an old colleague or a friend or a school alumni who has worked there for many, many years and is singing their praises, or maybe it's a studio working on a show that has a big emotional connection to you, you know? Now it is like you have no defense for the normal, we're different spiel. Because you so badly want to believe it. You so badly want to believe that this is finally going to be your happy ending forever home. And when that, of course, turns out not to be the case, man, it is a bitter feeling to have those ideals burst. You feel particularly lost after that, like the betrayal of a close friend. But this was all just in your mind. Because this is what Chris means. We have to understand they're not our friends. They're certainly not our family. In fact, as Chris says, they're all like that. We do this because there's a silent song in our hearts we must sing. We do this money or not. But it is a huge mistake to transpose those motivations onto studios. They're financial entities run for dollars and cents, not for the betterment of mankind or artistry at large. That doesn't make them inherently evil. It also doesn't make them our enemies. They're just lions being lions. So this new level of understanding, my latest aha moment, where does that leave me now? I wonder. I'm still mulling it over and trying to make sense of it. I suppose you have to adopt a more nuanced and grown-up view of things. What would be the new theme for this phase? Informed compromises? It doesn't exactly leap off the tongue, and it doesn't really give me a new clear goal to reach for. But that's the best I can do for now. I'm sure you're already listening to the Alan McKay podcast, and if not, you're missing out. Get after it. Alan has for years and years been speaking very openly and honestly about the realities of working in visual effects. In my opinion, he has a very balanced view of things. He's very aware that some clients or studios or shows are just simply bad clients, which means that he may say no to them, or if he does take them on, he will make them pay a steep penalty, a dramatically higher rate to compensate for the trouble he knows it will give him. I suppose, on one hand, it is flattering to be trusted to come in as a troubleshooter, but for this senior artist, what you're actually looking for is more the, we want you to be a long-term cornerstone of our texture team, instead of that well-paid short-term firefighting gig. Also, the more times you take a short-term gig, the more your CV will look like a person who cannot stay in one place more than 5 minutes. So it becomes self-defeating. What is the solution? To go all Alan McKay? And just say, so be it, and embrace the short-term gigs and forget all about the longer, more stable runs? I don't know, really. I really don't know. I used to work in investment banking, where it's all pit bulls and snakes and lions going at each other. I know that world, and I can sort of act that part for a time, although it doesn't come naturally to me. But in the art world, in my case, I find that the artist part inside of me is kind of like a naive little child. I think it is because creativity and beauty and artistry comes primarily from the emotional half of ourselves on a psychological level. That naive little child so badly wants to believe in the good of mankind and the noble and all those idealistic things. That's a problem because, one, It's not a realistic expectation, nor a very accurate representation of how the world actually is. And two, it gives you a terrible blindside that leaves you open to incredible disappointment when things do not turn out to match your rose-colored dreams. I think a more realistic worldview is you may be offered to do some creature work, and if that is your priority, like Chris here, then you weigh up those pros and cons. There is creature work to be had, might be good, could also be bad. The studio doesn't offer healthcare benefits, and its reputation is spotty here and there. But then again, the gig is only short, so can I live with that? Is that enough to make it worth it? Only you can answer that, as we all have different priorities. Okay, then you make your decision as best you can, going into it with your eyes wide open to the potential downsides, but still trying to focus on the positives you came for. This has been a long ramble. Maybe one I had to do more for my own benefit than anything else. I've had a painful, hard knot in my stomach while recording this. Do you know that feeling? Yeah, this is very personal. This is the naked texture artist after all. But I hope and have confidence that there is something universal here that you can benefit from too.
Again, it's that ebb and flow, right? Like depending on where you come in to the studio, at which point, that's going to determine the terms and conditions. But you do hear about certain reputations of studios. There are definitely some studios you want to avoid without mentioning any names. But and that's just from talking to other artists. It's just word of mouth. It's just like, don't go to this studio. They do this and this and this. I mean, there's a lot of it has to do with what do you want, right? Like, do you want to? Is it the projects that you're attracted to, or is it the pay scale? Like some people, they just want a job that pays the most because maybe VFX is just a job to them at this point. Maybe their passion is more travel or raising their kids or whatever it is. Whereas, like, I'm the sort of artist, I'll probably go to a studio based on the work. If you say, oh, we have some creatures, it's like it's a good development time. We got a good, we already have a relationship with this director. I mean, that's the sort of stuff that's going to appeal to me, and then we can just work out the nitty gritty, right? The fine details. But like I was in a position once where I went to a studio, and I thought I was going onto a creature show. That schedule got pushed, and so I was put on a different show that I had no interest in being on, doing environment work, which I don't really enjoy doing, and with the proviso that I was going to get put back on that creature show at a later date. That never happened. Instead, they loaded that show with other new people, and I never got to go on that show, which just made my head explode.
Sometimes you
And
wonder how exactly you'd like to be in the room where these decisions are made. Sometimes they seem very random. Like we can't, as artists, we can just sort of like see through a little keyhole into that world. We don't have the full picture of how these decisions are made. And they seem many times incredibly random, you know?
they are incredibly random. Here's the thing, right? Is recruiters don't see you as the guy that did Thanos. They just see you as a senior texture painter. So they're going to expect you to be able to do anything that they throw at you, whether it's a giant spaceship with 500 UDIMs. Like they expect you to have the experience to handle that, and that's understandable because they're not in the business of capturing high end talent that are known for doing one thing. They generally need somebody that's versatile,
Yeah.
and it just so happens they have some creature work that you might be good for. But it's a very different situation from a studio's perspective to an artist's perspective, because you and we have our favorite texture painters, but probably to the studios that they work for, they're just texture painters. They're just people that can
Yeah, that's
can do the job well.
yeah, you're right. They're just gray people, like heroes to us, but just another name and a face and a number where they
Yeah.
are. Yeah.
And that, I mean, it's good. It keeps your ego in check. It is commercial art at the end of the day. Even Frank Frazetta was just doing paintings for books,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
I mean, all the other artists look up to him like he's God, but to a publisher, he was just a very good fantasy artist. There's just that different perspective from inside and outside, I would say.
Yeah. The problem with us, of course, as artists is that we put a lot of ourselves into the work, which means that,
Yeah,
I don't think accountants do that or whatever. These other sort of jobs, like the more proper professions, they come home on the weekend. They're not sitting there practicing with Excel spreadsheets on the weekend just for the heck of it. We are a beast unto ourselves as working artists. We are
yeah,
obviously, it's a commercial endeavor, as you're saying, and the studios, they're just lions being lions.
yeah.
There's no remorse, there's no guilty feelings, they don't owe you an apology, but
No,
and they're paying your rent. So but
yes.
we do put more into it, I would wager, than just that sort of commercial level. Sure, you pay me for 8 hours, fine, I'll give you 8 hours. There's so much more that goes into it. We've just talked
I
about
mean,
how it takes over your entire life. You're out there on a hike,
yeah,
but you're still an artist there. It's wherever you go, you're still working on your craft.
yeah. Um, and I think it's just good to remember where the studio stands compared to you. I mean, what it really comes down to is who is going to be your direct supervisor, because that can make all the difference as well.
Yeah.
When I was hiring for Avengers movies, I was trying to curate my team and load it with people that I knew would be good at certain things. So I was looking for people that could do good creature work, but also were pretty great at doing hard surface, that sort of stuff, the vehicles, the weapons. So, I mean, that's what I was looking for. And I had people in mind for those roles. I had a list of like, all right, these are the people that I would love to get in. And then these people here, if we can get them, that'd be great as well. But there was definitely a tier system, and I would tell the recruiter, like, if we can really get this one, I think we'd be in great shape. This person here is worth two texture painters.
So
You know what I mean?
you with your short list there, you were doing the work for the recruiter, basically managing the recruiter. Sort of, here, look in that
Yeah.
direction. Don't look over
Well,
there.
it's because I know that it would lead to a more sort of a better experience for both myself,
Yeah, yeah.
but also for the project. I mean, recruiters are great. Don't get me wrong; they do their job well, but they obviously don't know as much as I do about the job. I'm helping them. Like, they're the filtering process. They're like, well, these are the people that applied. These people I think would be good. And then you're the one that has to be like, well, let's really look at their reel and talk to them and sort of figure out if they're going to be a good fit.
How do you discern that when you look at a reel, you talk to an artist? Many artists are not very good communicators, like verbally,
Mm.
or shy,
I tell you
introverted
what,
people. How do you draw that out?
well, you can pick up on a certain vibe. I mean, I tell you, to anybody that's listening to this that's a beginner, don't ever bring negative energy into an interview. Don't start bad mouthing a studio or people that you work with. That's a sure way to never get hired. Um, for me, I like what I would see pretty frequently was a lot of demo reels, especially for people that were juniors. They would tend to stick to something very safe. They would, texture a camera or a sewing machine or something like quite simple. You can tell that it's a very conservative
Okay.
but safe bet. And I
Cameras,
mean,
they
those
are
people,
they are popular, aren't they? I have
they're
a
very popular, and there's a lot of those kind of demo reels.
I have a
And I mean,
mentee at the think tank right now that's doing a camera. Not too late
I,
to change it, maybe. I don't know. Go
I mean,
on.
there's nothing wrong with it.
No.
There are great texture painters that have started their careers that way. But for me personally, if I'm looking for somebody that's going to hit that sort of short list, especially if they're juniors or whatever, like I put a lot of juniors from Think Tank, and some of them I'd mentored, so I had that advantage. But it was the people that had come up with original concepts or something more novel, something I hadn't quite seen before and done it really, really well. Like, one of the standouts for me was Javier Blanco. He was a really great creature guy from Think Tank that had done this awesome looking
Oh, yeah.
reptilian
I
dinosaur.
was gonna
You
say
may have seen his
the
stuff.
one based on the crocodile. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Oh, that
So,
one. He
but
hires himself right there. You know,
yeah,
that
exactly.
this is.
So even though he only did the one creature for his demo reel, that's all he needed because anybody that looks at that can say, wow, this person had like they've designed this, they've modeled it, they've textured it to the highest level. That's all they need to sort of sell themselves to get the kind of work that they want. And he went on to work on Jurassic World and did a bunch of dinosaurs, Aquaman, like lots of great creature work. I think he works at Ziva the last time I checked. But that's an impressive demo reel. But if I'm looking at 50 reels and they all are just kind of like a random object that's been textured quite well with Substance Painter, it's not going to stand out as much as something that's like got an interesting sort of makes an interesting impression. It shows some originality.
I'm gonna push back on this, Chris. Devil's
Okay,
advocate here. Okay,
sure.
and so you're a creature guy, 100%. This is in your blood. I would say that 99% of visual effects artists don't have that luxury because the work that we do, the work that pays, the work that is there available to us
Mm,
is, for the absolute majority's part, has nothing to do with creatures. It is buildings, it is set extensions, a couple of vehicles, maybe some digit doubles. Creature work is the top 0.01% of the work. So if you're saying that's me, this is who I am, I'm gonna go in that direction, sure, technically you have a chance, percentage wise. It's not great. You're gonna have some lean years ahead of you if you ever get there.
mm,
So in my experience as a texture artist, as a working artist, if you can, I sort of see the hiring process as twofold. You have demo reels should answer the question, can this person do the work that we have here on this show? As in, they can start on Monday and should be able to plug straight in and just get cracking, turning out assets. And then the interview, is this person a complete idiot or going to be nice enough to work with? Right?
mm-hmm.
That's just so
Yep.
like boiling it down to just two simple components, yes and no. Um,
Yep.
I would say that all of these reels with the objects, the cameras, and the so on and so forth, for all that ocean of the vast majority of visual effects work that is hard surface assets, that is about just recreating a prop from a reference photo and whatever, that does the trick. The guy that turns up
Yep.
with the crocodile based the lizard the creature that doesn't exist in real life, yes, it's incredibly impressive, but doesn't he stand the chance of maybe people looking at that? It's like, yeah, that's amazing, but we have no need for that here. Sorry,
Mm,
go home, and we are going to take this other guy that played it safe with a real.
yep.
That's my devil's advocate thing to you here. What do you think?
I think you made a really great point. It is true. Like the majority of my career as a texture painter has not been doing creature work. Like it's true. A lot of it is ingest, like just taking other people's assets from other
Oh
studios
boy, yeah.
and bringing them in and publishing them into our pipeline. Um,
How dare
I
they? How
think
dare they? The guy that painted Thanos, they're letting him do ingest. Don't they know who you are?
I
Honestly.
know.
Chris Nichols will be back in a future episode. Thanks for spending a little bit of your day with us. We have a tiny bit of housekeeping to do on the way out. If this episode has been helpful to you, why not share the podcast with your colleagues and friends? If you'd like to support the podcast, I'd appreciate if you bought me a coffee. You can do that on Ko-fi. That is spelled ko-fi.com/The Naked Texture Artist. One word. If you have suggestions, comments, or questions, I'd love to hear them. feel free to drop me a line on thenakedtextureartist@gmail.com. That is the naked texture artist written out in all one word @gmail.com. As I mentioned, having a busy day job in visual effects means my release schedule for this podcast can be a bit irregular. So if you don't want to miss out, subscribe to The Naked Texture Artist wherever you get your podcasts. Or follow the podcast on the socials, then you'll be alerted when the next episode drops. The music in this episode was Awake by Tycho. Nick Sifoni helped put the sound together, and everything else was done by me, your host, Mark Pierre Sondergaard. Speak to you soon.